For our global audience, and I'll remind John and our audience, we have truly a global reach. The recording will be available, even though we're live right now. We reach approximately 70,000, 73,000 LinkedIn followers, which is incredible. Just a few disclaimers before we get started. If you tuned in expecting a very professional program, you're in the wrong spot. I mean, this is very much fly by our seat of our pants. Wherever it takes us, it takes us. We don't share the questions in advance. So John is very type A. He likes to have everything advanced. So this will be a nice experiment with him today. And the last part I'll share is there are three aspects to DonVersations. What we'll start off with is getting to know John a little bit. Obviously everyone knows him in the industry, but get to know him a little bit personally. Secondly, we'll talk about some serious industry questions that are top of mind, where John's extensive expertise will come into play. And then we'll conclude with some rapid fire questions, and we'll have some fun with that. With that said, John, I hope you're ready and appreciate you making time today.
Yeah, awesome, Don. I've looked forward to this opportunity, and it should be entertaining. Thank you.
Hopefully you feel that way when it's over. But John, look, we have come to know you and admire you and respect the work you've done, most recently at Imperial Capital for quite some time. I know you've had an extensive career running Protection One and starting the Aegis Fund and so forth. But let me start off in this way. Tell us about John Mack, the teenager. I mean, did you like puzzles? Were you a little leaguer, bowling? Tell us about who you were about 13, 14 years old.
Yeah. Well, I was pretty active in sports. So I was captain of the football team, and I played on the soccer team, and was reasonably active in that context at that sort of age level. I was also active in Boy Scouts, where I ended up being an Eagle Scout. So I was at camping trips and Boy Scout events on weekends, and I was playing in a lot of sports events at school and for various types of little league. So that probably would have been the best way to characterize my early teens.
All right, so you're pretty active teenager, which is no surprise. Now, I should have introduced you as John E. Mack the fourth. So
Third.
The third. Okay, well, I jumped ahead. Give us a word or two about John E. Mack, the first, and then John E. Mack the second. Who were they, and what were their occupations?
So my grandfather, who was John Eric Mack Sr., was a graduate of Stanford, and he ran the family coffee business in Guatemala. We ran the largest coffee finca in Guatemala for about 100 years, and so he was running that business. And when my father was born, he ended up being John Eric Mack Jr. My grandfather was still around when I was born, so I became John Eric Mack III, and my grandfather was still around when my son was born, and he is none other than John Eric Mack IV, and goes by Quattro for a lot of people in the family.
Very cool. Yeah. So what are the chances there's a John E. Mack V in the future?
Well, I think probably a lower probability, only because we thought it was fun to keep it alive while we were all together, and we have some fun pictures of all four of us together. But we'll see. It's really up to my son, not to me. But I think the logic had more to do with the fact that we were all still alive and could have fun by all having the name. And we've alternated generations. So my grandfather went by John, my father went by Eric, I go by John, and my son goes by Eric or Quattro. So that we've used that middle name to good effect to differentiate between the different generations.
Oh, it's nice. It's nice in the family. So, John, I know from talking to you over the years, you ended up at a place called Stanford University. It wasn't your first choice. I know you tried to get into, not many people in the industry know this, you tried to get into one of the most prestigious universities in the country, the Catholic University of America, right here in DC. I happen to be an alumnus. So what happened? Why didn't Catholic pan out for you?
Well, as much as that had a lot of allure, there was a pretty big family connection to Stanford. My every generation of my family, going back 5 generations, has gone to Stanford. And my son and daughter were the first fifth generation kids at Stanford in the last 10 years. So we have a long legacy. My great grandmother went to Stanford in the first class, my grandfather and grandmother, my father and mother, and then my ex-wife and I were both at Stanford. So there's quite a bit of legacy involved, both for me and for my kids. And so we're doing our best to keep that alive, I guess.
Yeah, great. There's always, listen, you're a lifelong learner. There's always time to take classes at Catholic. You could do it virtually. I'm sure you're interested, maybe finance or something else. By the way, you studied human biology at Stanford. Now, how does one study human biology and end up at Imperial Capital?
Well, that human biology might been my attention to the good-looking gals in the classes I was taking, but no, it was a major that was the first of a whole series of interdisciplinary majors that Stanford came up with, where you could take classes in multiple different schools under the human biology title. And so I actually did a lot of work in solar engineering and ended up designing my own major in solar within the civil engineering department, as believe it or not, as the subtext for what I was doing in human biology. Human biology just had a lot of flexibility that allowed you to do to be more creative about how you wanted to design your major.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. All right, let's get serious for a minute. Let's talk about the industry and the state of the industry and what you're seeing and so forth. So first of all, thank you very much for playing a key role in securing the ground last week, not only through your own panel, but by interviewing Steve Jones, the CEO of Allied Universal. And I thought it was a great interview. You talked about AI and how Allied is leveraging AI for workforce development and retention. What is your opinion about AI in the industry? Is it overhyped? Is it um, are we breaking through the marketing spin when companies talk about what they're offering in terms of AI solutions for security? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's funny you asked the question. I've got CNBC on in my office, and they just had a big interview with a bunch of panelists talking about whether AI is overhyped or not relative to valuations at a lot of the tech companies that have run up on the AI trade with NVIDIA and others. So it's certainly relevant to what's in the dialogue today. Look, I think our industry has a better ability, and I've said this in a number of conferences, has a better ability to take advantage of AI in as much as we as an industry have been using what is really the precursor or the actual functional utilization of AI, because it's really been more about analytics and machine learning. And we're not, in most cases, really using true AI with generative capability as much as we're using analytics and machine learning tools. And our industry has done a very good job of figuring out how to use analytics and machine learning tools to take advantage of creating a much better and more effective security solutions with technology. Obviously, particularly in video, where we've been using analytics for 10 or 15 years very effectively. And certainly in other applications from access control across intrusion alarms, et cetera. So I think we have a good running start to understand ways to use the technology better. And of course, you have sort of logical conclusions where you can reduce manpower required, but I also think it has a lot to do with being more effective and creating faster, better, more robust solutions quickly, which in a security context is a pretty big deal. So when we're talking about saving lives, this technology being able to be used more effectively has a really, really meaningful proposition well beyond what you would talk about in the rest of the business world.
What are some, you see a lot, you have a lot of visibility through your deals and exposure to executives about emerging technologies. What are you excited about right now that we may not know about? What's on the horizon technology wise that you're looking at?
Well, look, I think it is really about next generation use of more generative AI. So generative AI for visual applications, for video applications, as opposed to just large language models, and what we're going to be able to do in the context of learning and identifying what's in video streams with AI is going to have huge implications for networks to your home, your business, et cetera, in a much more streamlined and yet highly secure way. So those would be three that would stand out for me.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Definitely things to watch. Now, coming off securing new ground, I heard a lot of different opinions from execs about how their companies were doing in the industry. Some were very bullish, very optimistic about how they're going to finish the fourth quarter. Others are more cautiously optimistic, not only about the fourth quarter, but going into 2025, concerned about the election, among other factors, right? So, in terms of sentiment among the C suite and among CEOs and presidents of companies you're speaking with, what are you hearing? I mean, what is their level of optimism about the industry for the balance of this year and then going into early 2025?
Well, I think it's very positive. Both Alper Chihingak from Raymond James and I were on a panel together, and we both made a similar observation that having been around doing investment banking in the industry for 20 years, both of us have a similar sentiment that the opportunity set in the market is as good as we've seen it in 20 years. So I think there's a strong view that there's an opportunity. There's some big macro elements that are coming up that will help us. Obviously, the decline in the Fed funds rate or in the coming months and years is certainly very helpful to the economy, and borrowing rates coming down. Getting the election behind us, regardless of who wins, just getting the election behind us is a good thing, because uncertainty is the bigger problem with elections, more so than necessarily some dramatic shift in what one party or the other is going to do. And so getting that uncertainty out of the way. And then just the fundamental promise of the technology. I made the observation at SNG that I think the beauty of what's happening in security these days is that our technology has this multifaceted capability to drive business value beyond just security. And that fact drives a higher probability for investment in security technologies and security solutions. And that's part of what's driving this very positive outlook going into next year. So that's my, and that would be consistent with me having conversations with a number of CEOs that we're involved with in the industry.
So therefore, your level of optimism is very high going to 2025.
Yes.
Okay.
See lots of opportunity and interesting companies and technology investors. I've talked about it in a number of the conferences I've gone to. One of the measures of how interesting and well this industry is doing is how much investor interest it's attracting. 10, 15 years ago, I used to have to work really hard to get only a handful of private equity guys to come to our big conference in December. We had 60 different private equity firms represented at the conference last year, and we'll have more this year. And that's a statement about the fact that for sophisticated professional investors, they see the security industry as having a lot of potential. So it doesn't have to just be me and a few CEOs talking about it. We have very smart investors looking at this sector and saying, wow, there's a bunch of opportunity in a lot of different subsectors of the industry.
So I'm glad you referenced your conference. Let's talk about SIC for a minute. For those who have never attended, either presented or just simply attended, just give us the quick overview of your conference.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to give it a preview. So the Security Investor Conference, SIC, is Imperial Capital's annual conference where we showcase leading companies in the industry, both public and private. We'll typically have one-on-ones with 60 to 70 different companies during the course of a very full day. And investors get a chance to, and other industry participants get a chance to see all these different CEOs talking about their business and talking about the market. And then everybody's interacting with each other in lunch and dinner and cocktail sessions. And so there's some very high level networking that goes on. But a wonderful opportunity to see C-level executives talk about their business in the industry across these different types of companies. So we're excited about doing it for our 21st year. It's grown every year, and this year will be no different. And as I say, one of the more interesting elements is the fact that it is getting a much higher level of attention from the investment community.
Well, and I think so. You said 21 years. I have to guess, but let me go back and talk about something you alluded to. You talked about the elections and agree, right? Let's get that behind us for purposes of investment and certain deal making and so forth. I want to ask you about the SEC. You follow a lot of private sector companies as well as publicly traded companies. Sometimes my experience working with CM members is the SEC will come out with a policy on cybersecurity or ESG related or what have you, and their conclusion is, hey, that only applies to publicly traded companies. That's not for me. We don't need to pay attention to that, et cetera. Why should non-publicly traded companies or private companies, why should they pay attention to some of those requirements coming out of the SEC, even though they may not be directly impacted by it?
Well, even previous to the SEC putting out stronger pronouncements, there's been a huge focus from investors and buyers on the cyber hardening level of target companies. So if you look at it with an M&A context to it, so if everybody is ultimately thinking about what's their business worth and how can they finance and or sell their business someday, there's no question that investors, buyers, lenders are all looking at your level of cyber hardening. It is now a standard part of M&A due diligence that you have to demonstrate that you've been going through pen testing, you've been getting annual audits, and if you haven't been audited, it's a strike against you. You will end up having to do an audit as part of the diligence for an M&A transaction. And if you're found to be deficient in a number of areas, it's the kind of thing that could ultimately lead to a diminution in the valuation of the business. So it's incredibly, incredibly relevant today. And then I think there's another level even beyond this sort of diligence. That table stakes is what I would call that. You have to be at a level where you're demonstrating that you're doing all that work to be cyber hardened and getting periodic audits on an annual basis or even semi-annually to make sure that you're properly protected. Your insurance providers giving you cyber insurance are going to require that these days. But then I think it goes to a whole nother level. And this is a very relevant, and it came up in the SNG conference this year, Don, and I would really reinforce it. Our industry needs to do more work. The physical security industry, creating a full-scale cyber hardening of all the infrastructure associated with physical security solutions. And that has not universally been the case with a lot of the technology we've been deploying. And it's become a bigger focus for end users, particularly sophisticated end users, looking to see that the full infrastructure being deployed is cyber hardened, and it's going to be an increasingly important distinguishing characteristic for success. So I can't say enough about how big a deal that's going to be.
Well, and to your point, I mean, as you know, we've set up a category of membership for end users. The next topic that we're having peer-to-peer discussion on is the security of security or security devices, right? So they are taking it really, really seriously. So I think excellent point. What about sustainability, John, from the SEC's perspective? I mean, are you seeing requirements or focus by investors looking at companies for a commitment to sustainability as well?
Not as much. I mean, there was a period of time 3 or 4 years ago where it appeared it was going to become a much bigger litmus test issue. And indeed, there are ESG audits that are done as part of M&A deals. They're not done universally. There are certain investors and strategic buyers that have a higher degree of focus on ESG. And so there literally are firms that will do full ESG audits on your business. But I would say that has been tempered in the last 2 or 3 years, and so it's not quite as prominent. And maybe it's being looked at in a more practical way. I think, at least from my vantage point, some of the focus on ESG had gotten carried away, and it was too extreme and really not consistent with practical ability to run a business. And I think where we are today is people are making a lot more practical decisions about reasonable and appropriate levels of ESG focus. And so that's more the context today than a few years ago, where it was beginning to look like it was going to become a litmus test issue.
So before we jump into a lightning round, I want to ask you about ASAP to PSAP. Now, you and I are very familiar with ASAP to PSAP. You are an advocate for this program within the Monitoring Association, there may be some listening who are not familiar with it. So if you could talk about why ASAP to PSAP is important, and then maybe speak about your chair of the endowment committee. The endowment committee through SIA has agreed to make an investment to upgrade ASAP to PSAP. If you could speak to that a little bit for those who may not be aware.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to do that, Don. As you know, it's an issue I'm more passionate about. So first of all, just to explain the acronyms here, um, ASAP is a protocol the alarm industry is going to use for being able to transmit information from an alarm monitoring center to a PSAP, a public safety answering point. Now, PSAP is also known as a 911 call center. And so the idea in this day and age is that an alarm monitoring center getting a signal from a home or a business shouldn't be then picking up the phone and calling the 911 center, waiting for the phone to be answered, and then trying to transmit information verbally in a day and age where all of that information should be able to be transmitted almost instantaneously through that alarm monitoring center to the appropriate PSAP, and such that their computer aided dispatch center, their call handling software at that 911 center is going to have all of that information pop up on the screen in front of the operator at the PSAP, and they can have a real time conversation with the alarm monitoring center to get other contextual information. But the 911 call center can take immediate action to dispatch the appropriate responder, appropriate first responder very quickly with a lot more intelligent information. And so when you boil it all down, that ability to transmit more rich data more quickly to that 911 center saves time and provides information that can save lives at the end of the day. So we truly think it's not an exaggeration to say a well executed transition to this technology across 911 centers in this country is going to dramatically improve the speed and the quality of response from first responders to emergencies. So we're pretty excited about this evolution. I do a lot of work in the public safety side, not just in the physical security side. And so I work with companies that deploy computer aided dispatch and call handling software and a lot of the technologies used on the 911 center side. And I can tell you that those agencies are just as excited about this evolution as is the alarm industry. And indeed, there's been federal funding to help support the evolution in the 911 industry to next generation networks so that the call centers are prepared with very good digital high speed infrastructure to get this information in and to retransmit it to the responding agencies. So there's a number of things converging here that are going to bring us to a whole new place with the efficacy of our 911 infrastructure in this country.
So if companies would like to get involved, become supportive of ASAP to PSAP and the initiative and the technology, the best course of action is to contact TMA. Is that your advice?
Yeah, the Monitoring Association, TMA, is the association that's been leading the charge to promote this technology deployment. The PSAP, the Public Safety Answering Point, has to deploy some bridging technology that allows the monitoring center to directly transmit information into that call handling software that I was just discussing. And so what the TMA is doing is setting up a separate not-for-profit entity that is being funded to do two things. One, to promote this technology for this call handling bridge, if you will, called ASAP, that the Monitoring Association is controlling. That's not a for-profit entity that's doing that. It's a nonprofit entity designed to aid the entire alarm monitoring industry. And the idea is that funding to help support that will fund promoting the rollout of that technology by something like 6,000 PSAPs in our country, and helping with advancing the technology and improving it over time. So those are the two investment criteria. And so funding to TMA to do that is into a nonprofit entity designed to help accelerate the deployment of this very effective technology.
Well, and I'll just add, I mean, thank you for the explanation. I'll just add, I mean, SIA also agrees it's extremely important technology and initiative by TMA. As I alluded to, or as I explained, we are investing a fair amount into the initiative as well. And so we look forward to the updates that are being made, being led by TMA in that regard. So, John, we're going to turn to our.
I'm going to sneak in one more comment. I do want to make it clear that the largest companies in the alarm industry have been donating for some time to the development of this technology and are part of a campaign that in the last couple of years has raised seven-figure level support, pretty meaningful seven-figure level support for the rollout of this technology and promotion and support. So it's been great to have the endorsement of SIA. The whole rest of the public safety industry sees that as a vote of support. But the industry itself is really stepping up to provide the funding that's needed to roll this out.
No, great. I mean, good point to make. All right, let's move into the final phase of this. So, John, we're going to be looking for some fairly concise answers to a series of questions here. Before I do that, let me just take a moment and always thank our in-kind sponsor, Sage Integration, John Nemirovsky, who's on the SIA Board of Directors, as well as thank Imperial Capital. And John, before I go to the third round, I'll make it clear to my audience, by the way, full disclosure, Sage is truly in-kind sponsor. Imperial is happy to be on there. They are not a paid sponsor. We are not a pay-to-play program. That's why we have a waiting list for people to be on DonVersations. But John, I want to give you a quick minute. Now, please, just no more than a minute. Why should companies work with Imperial Capital?
Oh, we consider ourselves to be the leading investment bank doing transaction work, M&A and financing work in the physical security industry. We've been doing it for 20 years. We have hundreds of transactions as a background to that work. We have relationships with the top investors, with the top buyers. And so our ability to help a business owner who's looking to do a financing, whether that's equity or debt financing or looking to sell their business, we're going to have lots of ability to understand the market, who the right investors are, to get very good valuation and to get something done quickly. So those would be the attributes that would certainly allow us to stand out as a great option for somebody looking for investment banking support in the physical security industry.
Absolutely. No, great. You did it under a minute. And I'll tell everybody, John, Imperial is also a SIA member company. At the end of this program, John is going to be announcing the level at which he's increasing his dues, which we're excited about that. So please stay on till the end of this program. All right, John, we're going to walk through these questions really quickly, okay?
Sure.
So in your career, which deal are you most proud of?
Oh, probably doing Protection One in the 90s. We took a very small alarm company started by the utility in Portland, Oregon, with a group of team members. We built that into the second largest alarm company in the United States, took it public, and had a very good run for investors over that period of time by the time we sold the business in the late 90s.
Okay, three-part question related to deals. What is the biggest mistake in your experience made by sellers of their business?
Simply not keeping organized records of what they're doing and managing the business efficiently. We so often run into businesses which have great potential, but when you get in to do the work to present the business to investors or buyers, they're incredibly disorganized. They haven't kept good records. They haven't managed their software well. And it really has a meaningful impact on valuation, and yet it's a self-inflicted wound. It's something that wasn't a market-driven problem. It was strictly you not organizing your business well. So can't understate the value of having a really well-organized business with good record keeping, good software and tracking and systems will yield significant benefits.
Biggest mistake made by buyers?
Not doing sufficient diligence, and candidly not doing diligence that's specific to the industry they're involved in. I've had a number of investors who've had sort of a peripheral exposure to us and have gone off and done deals that had they gotten a better understanding of the market, they might not have done, and deals that didn't turn out well because the fundamental understanding of the industry and the market dynamics wasn't well understood. And a bank like ours that knows the industry as well as we do can help you avoid those kind of mistakes. But I can certainly, I wouldn't do it in a venue like this, but I certainly know of a lot of mistakes made that could have been avoided by understanding the sector better.
The quickest way to kill a deal is what?
Is to get too emotional. One of our one of our jobs as a banker is to make sure that a seller, whether a seller or a client in the context of a financing, doesn't get too emotional with the party on the other side of the trade. Inevitably, there's very difficult issues you have to work through. It's hard not to take it emotionally and to get emotional, but if people can maintain cool heads and professionally address issues, you can overcome surprisingly significant obstacles. But you only do that if you keep a calm head. If you get emotional, it's the beginning of the end.
The best piece of negotiation advice that you have received in your career is what?
Start planning and organizing yourself to sell your business when you don't have to.
So let's go back and think about John Mack, the teenager, to John Mack today. What's the biggest life lesson that you've experienced or learned?
Oh, wow. Well, I spent a lot of time. I don't take my advice as well as I should, but I spend a lot of time talking to people about trying to run their lives in a way that eliminates or reduces stress. I think there's so many ways in your life and your career that you put more stress on yourself than you need to, and when you get a little older and wiser, and I don't know about wiser, but certainly older, you certainly recognize how much stress plays a role in health and relationships and all kinds of things. So any way you can manage your life to reduce stress, I think huge benefits in business and personal life and family and everything else. So there's my.
All right. So quick aside, building off that before I do the final round. You're a surfer. What else you do in your spare time? Surfing,
fly fishing, golf, mountain biking. Those are all probably my top. But surfing is the top of the charts. I live in Southern California, and when there's surf, which there is right now, I will try and be surfing 2 or 3 times a week when there's a good swell. And we're getting the first good swell in Southern California in about 6 months. So there's a lot of excited surfers in Southern California right now.
Yeah, and a lot of excited SIA members, which we look forward to holding a SIA there at your club in about 6 months. So, John, thank you. All right, so agree or disagree? Should we continue to call manufacturers manufacturers or technology service providers? Which one?
Oh, manufacturers.
Okay. All right, here we go. We're gonna wrap it up. Which actor would play John Mack in a movie?
Oh my God. George Clooney.
I was going to go Jack Nicholson. Jack Nicholson. Yeah. Do the Dodgers win the World Series?
Yes. That's easy.
Do you like bacon or eggs?
Eggs.
Did the young John Mack enjoy playing hangman or tic-tac-toe more?
Neither. But fun fact, I was captain of the ultimate frisbee team at Stanford that won a national championship.
Well, if you went to Catholic University, you would have won 2 championships. So that's okay. One is fine at Stanford. But nevertheless, what is a song or book that would define you?
Oh, gosh. Song or book that would describe me. Man, that's a tough one. I should have been better prepared for this. I guess I'll give it more of a category, but I was and still am at some level a deadhead from my college days, and I love a lot of the themes in that music. So that's probably the way I would answer the question.
All right. If you were chair of the Federal Reserve for one day and you did not need a majority vote of the Fed, what action would you take?
Gosh, I wouldn't change much of what we're doing. I think Powell is doing just about exactly what John Mack would do as head of the Fed, candidly. So I'm pretty happy. And that has not always been the case for me. I've had strong disagreements with the Fed past.
Okay. Final question, John. Here we go. This is the big one. I say tequila. You say.
More tequila.
All right. Look, I think this has been as expected, as advertised, very entertaining, but informative. Look, I think, John, to your credit, you've shared some insights in a very concise way that are important for buyers and sellers. For CM members, you've given an important perspective about the industry, which we always value. And so I do appreciate you making time to join this program. I will share that our next guest on DonVersations is Tom Cook
Oh,
from
awesome.
Hanwha. So yeah, we have a nice back-to-back. So John, thank you. And to write us off this program, our producer Byron will pull up a little bit more ABBA, which I know is one of your all-time favorite bands, John.